Walter Ramos's primal screams echoed through the alien jungle as the Vorta females ripped his spacesuit off his body. Queen Yaxa tightening her psychic grip on his mind, while her subordinates clawed viciously at each other in a frenzied battle to claim the prize human and his precious DNA for themselves. The intrepid human explorer had barely taken 2 steps out of his ship before finding himself surrounded by a horde of striking humanoid females, their lithe purple bodies glistening with sweat in the scorching sunlight. He had landed on Vorta, a remote world inhabited by a dying race gifted with powerful psychic abilities and driven by primal mating instincts. Their eyes glowed an eerie blue as they probed his mind, sensing his virility, the purity of his genes. To a species on the brink of extinction, Walter represented salvation, a final hope to strengthen their dwindling bloodline, and they would stop at nothing to possess him. Queen Yaxa was the first to stake her claim, her voice booming with authority. "The human is mine. He shall join my harem and sire a new generation of superior offspring to rule Vorta." But her pronouncement only ignited the simmering tensions among the other females. A chorus of shrieks filled the air as they protested, arguing, shoving, each asserting their own right to claim Walter for themselves. He tried to run, heart pounding, legs pumping, but an invisible psychic net yanked him back. The Vorta pounced, hands outstretched. "You cannot escape, human," Yaxa purred. "Your essence is too valuable. It must be ours if our kind is to survive." The queen's subordinates shrieked in rage, unwilling to concede. "I am the strongest warrior," one cried. "My genes best complement his. I have birthed the most offspring. I will produce the hardiest heirs," yelled another. Fists and feet began to fly as the conflict exploded into an all-out brawl. The females moved with blinding speed, possessed of superhuman strength and agility. Blows that could shatter steel rained down as they grappled and tore at each other in a no-holds-barred fight for breeding rights. Walter staggered to his feet, head throbbing from the psychic assault. He lurched towards his ship, survival instinct screaming at him to flee. But his heart dropped as he took in the sight of the craft. Hull breached, engines crushed, navigation array a sparking ruin. The Vorta had destroyed it in their frenzy without even realizing. He was stranded on an alien world, sole focus of a race of feuding psychic Amazons, with the future of their entire species literally hanging on his DNA. Jaw clenched, he drew himself up, preparing to fight, his wits and training the only weapons left to him. One man, caught in the middle of a savage alien mating war. The odds were beyond steep, but Walter had to find a way to survive this, protect himself, and somehow negotiate a truce between these deadly sirens before they tore each other, and him, to pieces. Or worse, before their extinction drove them to rash actions with galactic repercussions. It would be a battle unlike any he had trained for. On planet Vorta, he who controlled the seed controlled the future, a future Walter now held in his very human hands. Walter stepped between the battling Vorta females, his arms outstretched. "Stop this madness," he shouted over the chaos. "Fighting each other will only lead to more death and the end of your race." The females paused, eyeing him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Queen Yaxa stepped forward, her voice dripping with disdain. "And what solution do you propose, human? We cannot all claim you as mate." Walter met her gaze steadily. "Then let me prove my worth. I challenge you to a series of contests, tests of strength, intelligence, and skill. Whoever wins earns the right to claim me." Intrigued murmurs rippled through the crowd. Yaxa considered for a moment before nodding slowly. "Very well, human. We accept your challenge." For the first trial, Walter faced off against Zoltax, a hulking Vorta warrior whose muscles bulged with raw power. They circled each other, eyes locked, as the crowd watched with suspenseful pause. Zoltax lunged, seeking to crush Walter with his superior strength, but the human twisted aside at the last second, using Zoltax's own momentum against him. With a deft reversal, Walter pinned the surprised Vorta to the ground, claiming victory. Next, Walter and Queen Yaksa sat cross-legged before a strange alien game board, a web of glowing nodes and pulsing pathways. As they played, Walter felt Yaksa's consciousness probing at his own, seeking weaknesses. He focused his thoughts, using visualization techniques learned in astronaut training to shield his strategy. Across the board, pieces shifted and traps sprung. Walter lured Yaksa into overextending her forces, then struck at her exposed flank, shattering her defenses and cornering her psychic avatar. Grudgingly, the queen conceded defeat. For the final challenge, Walter, Yaksa, a cunning female named Lixis, and the agile Nara were teleported to a remote corner of Vorta's untamed wilderness. The first to make it back to the ship alive would be declared the winner. As they raced through the jungle, Walter and Lixis found themselves working together, her psychic senses alerting them to hidden dangers, and his high-tech survival gear helping them navigate the harsh terrain. They forded raging rivers, scrambled up treacherous cliffs, and outwitted snarling predators. All the while, a grudging respect grew between them. Yaksa and Nara pushed ahead, determined to beat Walter at any cost. They laid cunning traps and used their psychic powers to disorient and delay the others. But Walter's adaptability and Lixis's sensory abilities allowed them to stay one step ahead. As they neared the final stretch, a massive beast, all fangs and claws and fury, burst from the undergrowth. It pounced at Lixis, but Walter threw himself in its path, taking a vicious gash to the shoulder as he grappled with the monster. Yaksa and Nara arrived, and the rivals were forced to unite against the common threat. Lixis' psychic blast stunned the creature, buying Walter time to retrieve his plasma blaster and take aim. Yaksa and Nara leapt into the fray, a whirlwind of tooth and claw. With a final surge of strength, they brought the beast down. In the aftermath, an injured Walter collapsed, his blood staining the alien soil. Lixis cradled his head, pouring psychic energy into his wound to slow the bleeding. Yaksa and Nara stood over them, chests heaving, a new understanding dawning in their eyes. They had all tasted the bond of battle, the fire of shared struggle and survival. The old rivalries seemed petty in comparison. As they looked at each other, human and Vorta, a profound question hung in the air. Where would they go from here, now that the trials had reforged them all? Walter's head throbbed as he regained consciousness. The alien sun beat down on his face, and he felt the rough ground beneath him. As his vision cleared, he saw the Vorta females standing over him, their faces a mix of curiosity and wariness. Lixis knelt beside him, placing a cool hand on his forehead. "The human lives," she announced. "His mind is strong." Queen Yaksa stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. "He survived our trials, but what use is he to us now?" Walter tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "I came here to explore, to learn," he said through gritted teeth. "Not to conquer." Lixis nodded. "I sensed his intentions during our time in the jungle. He seeks an alliance, not domination." Yaksa scoffed. "An alliance? With an alien? Our ways have kept us alive for millennia." Before anyone could respond, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Walter's eyes widened as he recognized the sound of energy weapons powering up. "Ambush!" he shouted, diving for cover as blasts of psychic energy tore through the camp. Chaos erupted as a group of male Vorta charged into the clearing, their eyes glowing with murderous intent. At their head strode a towering figure, his presence radiating power. "Grax!" Yaksa hissed, her face contorted with rage. Walter's mind raced. He needed to act fast, or they'd all be killed or captured. He grabbed his fallen plasma rifle, ignoring the burning pain in his shoulder. "Lixis, Nara," he called out. "Can you create a psychic shield?" The two females nodded, concentrating as a shimmering barrier sprang up around them. "Yaksa, we need to work together," Walter said, meeting the queen's gaze. "Your people or your pride. Choose now." For a moment, Yaksa hesitated, then she nodded curtly, joining her psychic power to the others. Walter tapped into his wrist computer, activating a series of sonic pulses designed to disrupt neural patterns. As the male Vorta staggered, momentarily stunned, Walter and the females launched a counterattack. The battle raged across the camp. Walter's technology and combat training complemented the Vorta females' psychic abilities. They moved as one unit, covering each other's weaknesses. Suddenly, Grax broke through their defenses, his mental assault slamming into Yaksa like a battering ram. The queen faltered, her psychic shield flickering. Without thinking, Walter threw himself between them, taking the brunt of Grax's attack. Pain exploded behind his eyes as the alien consciousness invaded his mind. But Walter had been trained to resist psychic probes. He focused on a single thought, building it into an impenetrable wall. Grax reeled back, shocked by the human's mental fortitude. Taking advantage of the moment, Yaksa struck, her own psychic blast sending Grax tumbling to the ground. The remaining male Vorta, seeing their leader fall, retreated into the jungle. As the dust settled, Walter collapsed, his mind and body pushed to their limits. He felt gentle hands lifting him, heard worried voices speaking in hushed tones. When he came to, he found himself in a dimly lit chamber. Yaksa, Lixus, and Nara stood around him, their expressions guarded, but no longer hostile. "You saved my life," Yaksa said, her voice tinged with reluctant respect. Perhaps there is value in new alliances after all." Walter sat up slowly. "Your people face extinction. Fighting amongst yourselves will only hasten that end." Lixus stepped forward. "I propose we form a coalition. With the humans' aid, we can revitalize our species and forge a new path." Nara nodded in agreement, though Walter caught a calculating gleam in her eye. Yaksa paced, clearly torn between tradition and necessity. Finally, she turned to Walter. "Very well. We will form this coalition. But know this, human. You will be expected to contribute fully to our society's continuation." Walter's stomach churned at the implication, but he kept his face neutral. "I'll help however I can," he said carefully. "But I have conditions of my own. I want equal rights, the freedom to continue my research, and a say in how this alliance develops." The three Vorta females exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. At last, Yaksa nodded. "Agreed. But make no mistake, this arrangement remains fragile. Prove your worth, human, or face the consequences." As Walter looked at each of the Vorta in turn, Yaksa's regal suspicion, Lixus's cautious hope, Nara's veiled ambition, he realized he'd stepped into a political minefield unlike any he'd encountered on Earth. And with Grax and his renegades still out there, the danger was nowhere near the end. He'd survived the trials and earned a tentative place in Vorta society, but Walter knew the real test was just beginning. Walter stared at the three Vorta females, his mind turning from the implications of their agreement. This uneasy coalition, forged out of necessity and desperation, felt like a powder keg ready to explode at any moment. But they had no choice. The future of an entire species hung in the balance. "We must journey to the sacred valley," Yaksa declared, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of tradition. "Only there can we access the power needed to ensure our survival." Walter nodded, swallowing hard. "Lead the way." The trek through Vorta's hostile landscape tested them at every turn. Razor-sharp rock formations sliced through the soles of Walter's boots. Noxious gases belched from fissures in the ground, forcing them to don breathing apparatus. At night, the haunting cries of unseen predators kept them on constant alert. During one particularly harrowing moment, a massive tentacled creature erupted from a seemingly placid lake, its suckered limbs lashing out to ensnare Nara. Walter's quick thinking saved her. He lobbed a makeshift grenade fashioned from his gear into the beast's maw, stunning it long enough for Lixus and Yaksa to drag Nara to safety. As they trudged onward, Walter couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. His suspicions were confirmed when Lixus suddenly stiffened, her eyes going blank. "Grax," she hissed. "He follows us with a band of males. Their thoughts burn with hatred and greed." Yaksa's face hardened. Then we must move faster. After days of grueling travel, they crested a final ridge. Below them stretched a lush valley, at its center an ancient stone temple covered in twisting vines and cryptic symbols. The Sacred Valley, Yaksa breathed. And within, the Vril Codex. They approached the temple with reverence. Inside, atop a stone dais, sat an ornate book pulsing with an otherworldly energy. This is it, Yaksa explained, her voice hushed. The source of our ancestors' greatest power. With this, we could restore our people to glory. Lixis stepped forward, her fingers tracing the strange glyphs on the codex's cover. Her eyes widened. I can read it, she whispered. It speaks of a ritual to channel the Vril force, but... She hesitated, her face pale. Only one of pure spirit and intent may attempt it. The consequences for failure are catastrophic. Silence fell over the group as the implications sank in. Then chaos erupted. I am queen, Yaksa declared. The purity of my bloodline makes me the obvious choice. Nara scoffed. Your outdated traditions have led us to the brink of extinction. My vision for our future is what's needed. As the argument escalated, Walter noticed movement at the temple entrance. His warning came too late. Grax and his followers poured in, their eyes blazing with psychic energy. The Codex belongs to the strong, Grax roared. We'll use its power to forge a new order. The temple erupted into all-out war. Psychic blasts crackled through the air as Vorta fought Vorta. Walter ducked and weaved, using his plasma rifle to lay down covering fire and create choke points. In the chaos, Yaksa found herself cornered by Grax. The rogue male's mental assault slammed into her defenses with brutal force. Walter saw her falter, saw the moment Grax's attack breached her mind. Yaksa crumpled to the ground, blood trickling from her nose and ears. Walter rushed to her side, cradling her head as her life ebbed away. With her last breath, Yaksa locked eyes with Lixis. You must wield the Codex. Your heart is pure. Save our people. Nara's anguished cry echoed through the temple as Yaksa's decree registered. But there was no time to argue. Grax's forces were regrouping for another assault. Lixis stood before the Codex, her hands trembling. I'm not sure I'm worthy, she whispered to Walter. He gripped her shoulder. You're our best hope. I'll keep you safe while you perform the ritual. As Lixis began to chant, her voice rising above the din of battle, Walter took up a defensive position. He could see the conflict in Nara's eyes, duty warring with ambition. And beyond her, Grax's snarling face promised that this fight was just the beginning. The air crackled with tension as Lixis delved deeper into the ritual. Walter's finger tightened on his trigger, knowing that everything hinged on what happened next. The air crackled with raw psychic energy as Lixis began the ritual, her hands hovering over the ancient Vril Codex. Walter crouched behind a crumbling stone pillar, plasma rifle at the ready. The remaining loyal Vorta formed a protective circle around Lixis, their eyes scanning the temple entrance. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shuddered. Lightning arced across the sky, casting eerie shadows through the temple's cracked ceiling. Walter's hair stood on end, as the air itself seemed to vibrate with otherworldly power. A scream of rage echoed through the chamber. Walter turned to see Nara, her face contorted with fury and jealousy. She locked eyes with several Vorta warriors, giving a subtle nod. Walter's instincts screamed danger, but before he could react, chaos erupted. Psychic blasts rained down from the valley's edge as Grax and his renegades launched their assault. Walter's voice rang out, directing the defenders. Concentrate fire on their left flank. Don't let them breach the perimeter. The loyal Vorta unleashed their own psychic attacks, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Walter fired his plasma rifle, the searing bolts cutting down several attackers. But for every one that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. A searing pain exploded in Walter's mind as something slammed into him from behind. He sprawled to the ground, his vision blurring. Through the haze, he saw Nara's loyalists turning on their own kind, creating a deadly crossfire. Traitors! Yaxa's voice boomed, but it was quickly drowned out by the sounds of battle. Walter struggled to his feet, fighting through the disorientation. He saw Lixis, her face streaked with blood flowing from her eyes and nose as she desperately tried to maintain the ritual while deflecting psychic assaults. "Lixis!" Walter shouted, pushing through the melee to reach her. A blast of energy knocked him off his feet, and rough hands pinned him to the ground. He thrashed wildly, but Nara's enforcers held him fast. Through the chaos, Walter watched in horror as Nara strode purposefully towards Lixis. With a savage backhand, she struck the other female, sending her crumpling to the ground. The Vril Codex pulsed with unholy light as Nara seized it, her eyes blazing with triumph. "At last," Nara hissed, her voice deepening and distorting as she embraced the Codex's power. "The might of the Vril is mine to command." The air around Nara warped and twisted. Her body contorted, limbs elongating grotesquely as raw psychic energy coursed through her. When she spoke again, it was in a language that hurt Walter's ears and made his teeth ache. With a gesture, Nara turned her attention to Grax and his forces. Their screams cut off abruptly as invisible force crushed them, reducing them to bloody pulp. Yaxa's loyalists met a similar fate, their bodies twisting and breaking as Nara's power raged unchecked. Walter struggled against his captors, feeling utterly helpless as he watched the slaughter unfold. Nara's gaze fell upon him, and a cruel smile twisted her warped features. "You, human," she rasped, floating towards him. "You will be the instrument of my new order. Together we shall breed a race of psychic gods." Walter spat in her face, defiance burning in his eyes. "I'll die first," he snarled. Nara's eyes narrowed, and Walter felt an immense pressure building in his skull. "Then I will break you and take what I need," she growled. As blackness crept into the edges of Walter's vision, he saw a flicker of movement. Lixis, battered and bleeding, rose to her feet. With a cry of anguish, she threw herself at Nara, channeling the last of her psychic reserves. "No!" Nara shrieked as Lixis's assault disrupted her focus. In that moment of distraction, Lixis locked eyes with Walter. Her expression was one of sorrow and drive. "Forgive me," she whispered. Then, in a blinding flash of light, both Lixis and Nara vanished. The shockwave knocked Walter unconscious. When he came to, the temple lay in ruins. Bodies of Vorta littered the ground, and the acrid smell of burnt flesh filled the air. Walter pushed himself up, every movement sending waves of pain through his battered body. A faint sound drew his attention. Yaxa, her once regal form now scarred and broken, crawled towards him.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.